Donald, good evening. I am Charles Payne, and breaking tonight, President Trump just declaring that the U.S. will not be going into Syria. In fact, here's a preview of his interview with our very own Maria Bartiromo.
We're not going into Syria, but when I see people using horrible, horrible chemical weapons, which they agreed not to use under the Obama administration, but they violated it.
They said they got rid of them.
Hey, look, what I did should have been done by the Obama administration a long time before I did it. And you would have had a much better, I think Syria would be a lot better off right now than it has been.
Well, you can catch the full interview tomorrow on Mornings with Maria. Joining me now, former Congresswoman Nan Hayworth, Rich Lowry, and Tammy Bruce. All right, Tammy, let me start with you. No boots on the ground. Okay, we got that part, but there has been a major shift with respect to President Trump's approach to at least Syria and Assad. Rex Tillerson, who on Sunday was sort of saying, hey, you know, we don't really care that much about regime change. Today, after this G7 meeting, and as he went into Moscow, saying Assad must go.
Yeah, and Nikki Haley was the first sign of that, as she was indicating the administration's position. This is a sign of leadership. I mean, you can have a principle base of what's important to you, and then when things change on the ground, you're going to adapt to that. That's what's required here. It's like if you bought a house and you said you weren't going to do renovations, and then the kitchen is on fire. Of course you're going to do renovations. So it takes an ability to understand what's important. He's been listening to the generals, which he's been lauded for. This is certainly a measured dynamic, a calm dynamic. So he's showing, I think, the range of what's required in a situation that's dynamic and fluid.
Nan, it is dynamic, it is fluid, and it's been measured thus far. But the analogy I would use is buying a bag of cookies and saying to myself, I'm only going to have one. Right. Then I have cookie creep. Okay? Right. We're worried about mission creep right now because I don't know that any president really realistically thinks that any of these things will blow up to the degree that they are. You're starting with Vietnam, coming all the way forward. So how does President Trump make sure that this does not become a quagmire?
Well, I think actually, Rich, National Review had a great piece by Conrad Black, who said, look, this is now the end. The president has signaled the end of an era of delusional altruism and deliberate weakness. And apropos of the minefield you talked about, President Trump is walking into an enormous minefield in international affairs that has been left to him by President Obama. The reason he had to intervene in Syria as he did is because the Obama administration did not eliminate the chemical weapons, did not actually eliminate the red line. And the president is going to have to be highly adaptive as these situations proceed, because a lot more trouble is going to unfold, and that's why it's so important for him to proceed with his domestic agenda and strengthen us as a nation and strengthen our economy so that we can afford to deal with these challenges.
I mean, no one thought that foreign policy would be as prominent in the news at this particular stage, I don't think, just a couple of weeks ago. But here we are, North Korea on the brink, Syria on the brink, and Tillerson in Moscow with making demands of Russia to stop their backing of Assad. What happens if they don't?
With very tough words and true words. And Charles, I think it's just extraordinary that the administration that supposedly colluded with Russia on its way into office is immediately, almost right out of the box, more hard-headed and realistic about Russia than the Obama administration was for 8 years. Now, obviously, we don't get in a shooting war with Russia in Syria or anywhere else, but we do want to establish leverage. We want to establish our deterrence and work on a long-term plan to pressure Assad such as that eventually you can get a diplomatic settlement worthy of that country.
Assad, though, you know, Arab Springs came and went. He's one of the last guys standing. And again, you have to wonder, because whatever deal we cut with Russia will have to include them keeping naval bases with that Mediterranean access. You wonder what role Iran is going to play in this. And I do wonder, again, understanding that what motivated President Trump were those scenes. We're still going to have women, children being slaughtered in that country by Assad until he is forced to stop. And if Russia doesn't stop him, that's where I'm worried.
Well, you know, while President Trump is really looking at a scene that's changing frantically each day, so are the Russians, because they had, you know, Iran, Assad is the client of Iran. You had a triumvirate there. You figured America was out of the Middle East. This was a door open for them to sweep into the Middle East. Russia, it's their only warm water port. It was like all good, right? It was all good. And suddenly Mothra shows up, and everything is different. So the problem is with Russia, which is a weaker state. They really can't confront us. They thought this was an easy push, but now it has changed. So it comes down to really, what does Donald Trump want? What does General Mattis want? Nikki Haley, who is, of course, the breakout star, is she going to really also then start moving into some kind of policy dynamic about what is appropriate? But this is where leadership, the conventional wisdom of the West, where it comes through, Europe, its condition, a refugee stream that is weaponized. All of these things have to be dealt with. The good news is Donald Trump has surrounded himself with generals who know what they're doing.
And to that point, and by the way, speaking of Nikki Haley, she was also the first in this administration that I can recall who was taking a hard line against Vladimir Putin almost out the gate. I mean, so, you know, there was a bromance going on. She was never a part of that whole agenda.
No, that's right.
But we are looking at a situation, though, that you have to figure over the next perhaps 30 days or so, something will come to a head there. Is it possible that Russia says, hey, we can have everything we want there? Because I don't buy into reports that they knew about the chemical weapons part of this. I think they were shocked because, to Tammy's point, no one was paying attention. It could have been business as usual. All of a sudden, you throw these chemical weapons into the dynamic. Either Assad is truly drunk and crazy on power, or they really thought that there were no limits, that the West would not pay attention. The West is paying attention, and perhaps Russia could have everything that it wants by just simply helping us get rid of Assad.
I think the key is going to be for the Trump administration that when they say something is going to happen, it will happen, which is the key distinction between its antecedent and this administration. And I'm glad, Charles, that we have Rex Tillerson as Secretary of State as the counterpart to Nikki Haley in the UN, because both of them are people of resolute distinction. And in Rex Tillerson's case, he's dealt with Putin. He knows how to manage the nuances of his
That's a genius appointment there, because
personality, exactly, so that we can get the kind of result with a minimum of force, with a minimum of, as one of the Russian generals, I think it was, says, with a minimum of kinetic encounter risk.
I like that.
Encounter risk.
Yeah, that's you know, the euphemism. But
like
I don't think they don't want that either.
Right,
I don't think, because they know that with this administration there will be repercussions.
But Rex Tillerson not meeting with Vladimir Putin this trip. He's meeting with his counterpart Lavrov. And unfortunately, before he left for Moscow, the G7 did not give him additional ammunition. Right. They did not go through. I think it was the UK put forth, you know, sort of a condemnation of Russia and Syria. And to me, that's another major problem here, guys, is that the West in general, you talk about feckless, and I hesitate to use the word cowardly, but I'll let it slip out my mouth anyway. Why couldn't they at least be able to condemn Russia in Syria and let Tillerson go into Moscow with the full backing of the G7 to further press his case?
Right. I think that's an important point. We need to contain and squeeze out Russia and Iran to the extent we can in Syria. Now, it's very hard to do, but economic sanctions, further economic sanctions, are a key part of the puzzle with both those countries. And ultimately, it doesn't make sense to say Assad has to go unless you know what you want to take his place, unless you have a moderate Sunni force on the ground to either march into Damascus or at least hold a swath of the country, and we don't have that at the moment. The first step is routing ISIS, which we're making progress on, routing Al-Qaeda, and then trying to work on it some from the ground up. But this is going to be a years-long effort.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people realize the Alawites sect, which is where Assad is from, that's his religious sect. Only 20% of the population. The Sunnis have been beaten down for multi-generations, first by his father and then by him. So how do you get that? How do you get, first of all, a group of people who have been battered so badly? Because Saddam Hussein did the same thing in his country, that you leave a void of willingness, you leave a void of the ability to fight back. How do we ensure that whoever takes over for him isn't just overrun overnight because they're not accustomed to fighting back?
Well, you know, of course, that was the problem with the removal of Gaddafi as well, is that there was no other plan, and there was a sense that you in a way can't have a plan. I think George W. Bush did the best you could do with the reformation of Iraq. And the people came together. This is something, of course, that would be generational. Anything we do would have to be generational in that regard. The goal, though, to some degree, of course, has to be be the notion that every human being wants democracy and wants freedom, including Arabs. Thank you very much. But we do have, of course, generational genocide, war, the terrorist groups that are filtering through the country. This is going to it's going to take somebody who can weave and deal with the thing that's outstanding. It has to also be local. And I think, yes, the goal, though, we can do this without having to hand over power to groups like Russia. And certainly Iran has been obviously the big part of the problem there as well. So it's about trusting our own judgment, looking at the George W. Bush template, and realizing that this is going to have to be a commitment which is a part of our own national security. It's not nation building. It's about American national security as well.
And perhaps American history, too. I should let the audience know, today in 1945, the U.S. Third Army liberated Buchenwald, which was judged second only to Auschwitz with respect to the horrors and imposed on its prisoners. So America's been in this position before. Guys, thank